What if the housing market crashed today? What would that mean to you as a homeowner? And if you are thinking about buying a house, how would that affect your buying power? How would that even affect your mindset onto what you'd be thinking about going into the real estate market? I wanted to shoot this video to talk about some of these ideas and things that I remember from the crash back in 2008. Before we hop into the video, I want to give a special shout out to Celtic. He is our commenter of the week, and he asked the question, Sean, when I make my second home my primary home, do I need to inform my servicer of the change? And Celtic, the answer is no. You don't need to notify your servicer. You can go ahead and just make the changes on your own. You may want to just notify your accountant depending on how you're filing your taxes. The fact that you've now changed it from your second home to your primary home. But that's a great question. And don't forget, if you guys ever have questions, make sure to comment below, or you can always send me an email. I'd be happy to answer them, and maybe you will get featured as our commenter of the week. Now, let's talk about the crash. Everyone keeps talking about the crash of 2008 and thinking that we're going to repeat that all over again. I wanted to point out several things that I remember about being in the business back in 2008 and some of the things that took place, because it wasn't pretty back then. It wasn't all sunshine and rainbows, and a lot of people got hurt financially. As much as a home buyer would love to see cheaper prices, but you have to look at the domino effect and all the other ramifications that come along with a real estate crash. But let's go down that road and let's talk about some of these things that have happened. One of the things that drove a lot of people to foreclose on their homes back in the crash was the lack of equity in their properties. Many properties back then went completely upside down, meaning you owed, let's say, $400,000 on your home, and then it was worth $300,000, $250,000, just in a blink of an eye. The equity got stripped away, and now you're holding essentially a bag of coal. Many people looked at that and they wanted to get out. They had no way of getting out of the deal because, one, they probably were in a bad loan because mortgages were running rampant back then with subprime loans, no money down mortgages, stated income loans. I remember when I got into the business, I remember all these people talking about making all this money as real estate agents and loan officers, but the crash was already starting to happen. So I was really confused as to where the easy money was, because I was definitely working my butt off back then to try to make a living, but it was super hard because there was no equity. So you would hear about refinances, but you could never refinance anyone because there was no equity. So if your house was upside down by $100,000, $200,000, the average homeowner back then, they were so over leveraged that they looked at that debt, and the only way out was to either walk away, which led to the foreclosure, or they would file bankruptcy. Then it would go back to the courts and to the bank, and then they would then sell and auction the home off. Then they'd be stuck. Now they have to find a place to rent because their credit went down the drain. I think that's definitely one thing to think about, is that if you are on the sidelines hoping for a crash, and it may not even be anything as severe as what we've seen in 08, but again, we're playing the what if game here, and what if that did happen? I don't think we understand how many people will be financially hurt if they were to lose all that equity in their property. Unemployment would go up, so people would start to lose their jobs again. And would the government step in and provide the bailouts and the help that they would need? I don't know. I know that during COVID, when banks came out and offered forbearances, they were willing to help people. But what if the banks didn't offer the help with forbearances? How many more foreclosures would have went to the market? How many people would have been forced to sell their homes because they didn't have the income because of COVID, and you couldn't go to work? So there's so many negative things that come along with this quote unquote crash, that yes, it would be great to see home prices stabilize or maybe become a little more normalized with what we're accustomed to seeing. But I think there's a lot more negativity that will come along with it that maybe we're not necessarily thinking about, because all we're focused on is, can I get that home price today what it used to be 10 years ago? That's one of the beauties of owning real estate, is that it typically appreciates over time. And if you look at the last 10 years, it's been on a steady incline, and it's been getting better and better for all of us that have owned property. But for those that didn't take advantage of low interest rates and the opportunity to purchase, now you're looking at it like you have FOMO. You missed out on that opportunity, and now you're trying to get in before things get even worse. Let's go back in time and look at the stock market and what happened back in 2008. The stock market crash of 2008 occurred on September 29th, 2008. The Dow Jones fell by 777 points. Until the stock market crash of 2020 and the start of COVID, it was the largest point drop in history. Again, we all want lower prices, but it's going to come with a price. We're going to see your stock portfolios, your 401ks take a hit. And so many of you out there are relying on this as your retirement to pay for your future living. And imagine if you lost all those funds and you're not able to get that back. What if you're at the tail end of your working career, hoping to retire, but now your stock portfolio takes a hit? There's no way you can retire. You have to continue to keep working, which I've seen with some clients. Now, the article continues to go on and say, on October 9th, 2007, the Dow hit its pre-recession high and closed at 14,000, a little over 14,000 points. By March 5th, 2009, it dropped by more than 50%. So think about that for a second. Let's say you had a couple $100,000 in your stock account and now you've got half of that money. For most of you, I know you're not going to think about liquidating to go buy real estate. So that's one thing I always think about when our clients are asking us, hey, if there's a crash, what would you do? I think for most people, the average American out there, if there's a stock market crash that severe again, you're probably not going to go buy real estate. You're probably worried, is all of my hard-earned money protected? Is all of my retirement just gone? Am I going to have to continue to work for another 20 years or work until I'm 60, 70 years old just to have enough income to live? Because again, look at where rental prices are today. They're skyrocketing. They're just as bad as home prices that have been going up. So if you're locked into a lease that your landlord just increased 500 or $1,000, all that money is going to be going just to your living expenses. And look at inflation the way it is today. Gas prices are going up, and that's not going to drop overnight. There's all these added expenses that we've already been taking on as consumers that have already changed some of our lifestyle at this point. So not only did the stock market take a hit, but let's look at unemployment. I just did a simple Google search here. Unemployment rates back in 2008 were about 7.3%, significantly higher than what we are today. If you look at 2022, we're at under 4%. So it's almost doubled. So again, if you are a home buyer on the sidelines, the question to ask yourself is, are you going to have a job if this were to take place? We're already seeing some layoffs, but imagine if your company, again, either cut your hours or they completely let you go. And now you have a surplus of people potentially in the workforce that, are you going to be able to get a job? Do you have other credentials that will help you get a job? And again, if that were to happen, I think the last thing you're thinking about is, how do I go buy a house today? You're more concerned about putting food on the table. And I remember those days because I was fresh out of college and I had my degree and I was struggling and I was deciding, do I stay in the mortgage industry or do I go find a job? I've got a degree from a great university. I know I could probably find a job somewhere, but I remember putting countless resumes online with monster.com, Career Builder, all these other online places that I felt like I could try to get a job. I was willing to relocate to anywhere in the country. I was willing to work essentially anywhere just to get my foot in the door. I remember applying to even hotels and casinos here in Vegas that I didn't have any experience, but I was willing to just see if I could get something because I wanted to find a job. And I think if things were to happen like that again, that would be the cause for most people, unfortunately, that you'd be scraping to get by. And the last thing you're going to think about is, hey, the house that I was falling in love with before was $500,000 and now I can get it for, let's say, $300,000. You're not going to be worried about that. You're going to make sure that you can still keep the roof over your head and your landlord doesn't kick you out. And another thing to think about too, even though interest rates have been coming up lately, and some of you that are newer to the housing market, you've been hearing rates in the 4% range and 5% range, and you guys have been freaking out when you hear that. But I wanted to go to Freddie Mac's website and let's actually take a look at some of the interest rates over the years. It should give you a good perspective that interest rates are still great today. But let's go back to the days of the crash, because I don't think a lot of people remember those days too well. If you look at 2007, the average rate was 6.3%, and you were paying about a half a point discount point to buy that rate down. Think about that. I've talked to so many clients recently, and I told them their rate was 4.25%, 4.5%, and they looked at me like I had a third eye in the middle of my head, like I was crazy. 4% still a good rate. So imagine, again, if the market were to crash, if we're in that moment, and now your lender's telling you your rate's 6.5%. So let's even take a look at 2008. Again, the average rate was still 6%. You touch the fives here and there at some points throughout the year, but it wasn't until 2012 where rates got better and got into the threes. So remember, there's always an ebb and flow with anything out there in life, and especially in the real estate market. So even though today you might think that a 4% or 5% rate is high, but again, if we go back to the crash of 2007, you were talking 6%. And I know some of you that might be a little older, bought homes back in the day. You can even recount, look at 1992. The average rate was 8%. And you know what? People still bought homes. 1989, rates were 10%. Let's go back to my birth year. I was born in 1984. And look at that, 13%. That's like a credit card these days, if you got really good credit. You have to always take things into account. It's all relative. But again, if we were to go through the crash, imagine paying 6% interest on a home. And another thing that I remembered during the crash was there was a lot of investors that ended up buying properties. And I think if you were to go back and look over these last several years, the amount of money that has been made in the stock market, in NFTs, in the crypto market, all these other alternative sources have been making people millionaires literally overnight. So even if the market were to take a crash like we're talking about, I would project that some of these millionaires out there would probably cash out, and they would probably look to buy some real estate because it would be so cheap. So as a first-time home buyer, again, I think that's one of the worst things that you could want to have happen, is because of the competition would increase significantly. And I remember when the market crashed in Las Vegas and I was doing loans, we were doing mortgages on single family homes for under $100,000. There were investors that were buying up 10 properties at a time. We were doing condo financing for like $30,000. It was insane. So as a first-time home buyer, you're going to be up against even more competition because there's that much more money out there in the marketplace that people are sitting on the sidelines waiting for if something like this were to happen. I believe at one point in Las Vegas, the amount of cash buyers every single month amounted to somewhere to 50 to 60% of all the homes that were being sold were going to cash buyers. So if you think about that, if you were financing, you had a really tough time trying to get your offer accepted because the seller wanted to go with the quickest deal and they were willing to go to the cash buyer, which made your efforts as a potential home owner that much more difficult. And I could remember the homes were trashed because why? People were upset that their dream home that they put all this money into and they thought that this was going to be their retirement is now worth 50% less. So even though there was some inventory on the marketplace, you had to have money in order to rehab the home. I remember walking into houses that people would literally dump concrete down the kitchen drain or the bathrooms, and they would or the bathtubs, and they would literally run the water and flood the entire house. I walked into numerous homes that were just completely annihilated, that you would have to gut the entire thing. Again, if you don't have the cash to renovate the house, or your lender doesn't know about renovation financing, how are you going to buy the house? Even if you could get it for $100,000, you don't have the extra money to go and do the rehabs. You can even remember that back in the day, I believe even in Detroit, homes were being sold for like $1,000 and no one would buy it because they were in the worst part of town and no one would even buy those homes. There's so many things that come up that would cause issues for the housing market. And as a home buyer, that may not be the best thing that you would want. Oh, and by the way, if we haven't met, my name is Seanu Uyehara with Loan Depot, and it seems just like yesterday, I was just like you, looking to buy my first home, or better yet, my first investment property, and getting my first pre-approval done. And I tell you, I've been there and I've done that. And this is why I created my channel, to help you navigate this crazy real estate and mortgage world that we're in. So make sure to click on that subscribe button, because we're dropping content every single week. And if you do need help getting pre-approved anywhere else in America, don't forget to hit the description below for links on how to get started. And another pain in the butt that also came up throughout the crash was short sales. Short sales was a total nightmare to deal with because the banks couldn't tell the right hand from the left hand. So essentially, if you were doing a short sale, you would tell a listing agent who'd be selling your home that you want to sell your property and you are upside down. So again, let's just say you owed $400,000 on your house, market value, let's just call it $300,000. Your listing agent would negotiate a deal with the bank to try to get them to accept a certain dollar amount that they could then sell the property for. But the downside with a short sale is you had no idea how long it was going to take. I remember we had clients that would go into contract, and you think waiting 12 months for a new build today is bad. There were people that were in contract for over a year in escrow because the servicer would change from one bank to the next, and then you'd have to start the negotiations all over with the bank. There were so many headaches that people would fall in love with houses that they would never know when they would ever get a response. But if you could wait it out long enough, you might get yourself an amazing deal at a discounted price. So again, if this crash were to happen and people were upside down on value, short sales would come back. And even though there would potentially be more inventory on the marketplace, you wouldn't be able to close on the house in 30 days. You'd have to wait. The agents would have to negotiate those deals, and you could maybe get the house if it doesn't go into foreclosure. So short sales, again, it was a total nightmare to deal with. And don't forget to check out this video to learn how to buy your first home, or better yet, your first rental property. And if you are thinking about purchasing in today's market, don't forget you can hit the description below for links on how to get your pre-approval started, because we've got you covered from coast to coast, and I'll see you on the next video.